Welcome to True Crime Talks, where we unravel the darkest secrets behind shocking tragedies. In today's story, a chilling tale of deception, murder, and a devastating truth that cost a woman her life. Amelia Carter believed she had found her soulmate in Marcus Carter. Their love story seemed like something out of a fairy tale, beginning in a cozy coffee shop where their eyes met across the room. Marcus's charm was undeniable. He had a warm smile that could light up any room and a calm confidence that immediately drew her in. Within months, their relationship blossomed into something beautiful, and it wasn't long before they decided to tie the knot. To everyone around them, they seemed like the perfect couple, completely in sync and madly in love. Their life together was idyllic. They settled into a picturesque suburban neighborhood where their home quickly became a reflection of their seemingly flawless relationship. Every detail was curated to perfection, from the neatly trimmed lawn to the cozy interiors filled with personal touches that showcased their life together. To their friends and family, Amelia and Marcus were the embodiment of happiness. She often described him as a thoughtful husband who always seemed to know how to make her smile, whether it was through spontaneous weekend getaways or little notes left around the house. Despite the surface-level perfection, there were subtle cracks that Amelia couldn't ignore. Marcus had a mysterious air about him, especially when it came to his past. Early in their relationship, Amelia had asked about his first wife, Evelyn. His response was brief and guarded. He simply told her that Evelyn had tragically passed away years ago in an accident. The pain in his voice was convincing, and out of respect for what she assumed was a deep wound, Amelia didn't press him further. Over time, however, Marcus's reluctance to discuss Evelyn began to feel less like grief and more like deliberate secrecy. There were moments that felt off. Marcus would occasionally grow tense when the topic of his past was even tangentially brought up. If someone mentioned Evelyn, he would deflect or change the subject entirely. Amelia dismissed these moments, chalking them up to lingering sadness. She convinced herself that it wasn't unusual for someone to avoid painful memories, especially of someone they had loved. Besides, everything else in their life seemed perfect. Why fixate on something that might just reopen old wounds? But as time went on, Amelia's unease grew. She started to notice other things about Marcus that didn't quite add up. He had a tendency to keep certain parts of his life tightly guarded. For instance, he never talked about his family in much detail, and Amelia realized she didn't even know where he'd gone to college. She brushed off these oddities as quirks of his personality, reasoning that everyone had their secrets and not everything needed to be shared. Marcus had a way of diverting attention from these inconsistencies with his charm. Whenever Amelia's curiosity seemed to peek through, he would shower her with affection or surprise her with grand gestures. It always worked. Amelia felt reassured and loved, convinced that whatever shadows existed in Marcus's past had no bearing on their present or future. To outsiders, Amelia and Marcus had it all. But for Amelia, there was a lingering sense of unease she couldn't quite articulate, an invisible thread tugging at the corners of her mind. Little did she know, the truth about Marcus's past was not only darker than she imagined, but also closer to her than she could ever have feared. Amelia's curiosity about Marcus's past began as a quiet hum in the back of her mind, but it grew louder over time. She had always respected his unwillingness to dwell on his first marriage, but there were too many unanswered questions. The moment that changed everything came one rainy afternoon when she was organizing the attic. She had decided to tackle the cluttered space, hoping to create room for seasonal decorations and old family mementos. Amid dusty boxes and forgotten knickknacks, she found something that stopped her in her tracks. A weathered photo album tucked inside a plain cardboard box. As she flipped through its pages, Amelia was struck by how happy Marcus looked in the photos. There he was, younger but unmistakably him, standing next to a beautiful woman who radiated elegance and confidence. It didn't take long for Amelia to realize that this was Evelyn, his first wife. The pictures were ordinary, capturing moments of joy and affection between the couple, but there was something unsettling about how these memories had been hidden away, as though Marcus had deliberately tried to erase them from view. Tucked behind one of the photographs was a folded newspaper clipping that made Amelia's heart race. She unfolded it carefully, her hands trembling as her eyes scanned the headline, "Local woman found dead in suspected homicide." The article described Evelyn's death in shocking detail. It explained that she had been found strangled in her home, with no signs of forced entry, suggesting that she had known her killer. The report mentioned that the police had interviewed her husband, Marcus Carter, as part of their investigation, but he had been cleared due to insufficient evidence. The case ultimately went cold. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she reread the article, the words blurring together. Marcus had always told her that Evelyn had died in a tragic accident, but this was something entirely different. Why had he lied? Why had he never mentioned that Evelyn's death had been ruled a homicide? The realization left her shaken. For the first time, she wondered if the man she had married might not be who she thought he was. Unable to suppress her growing anxiety, Amelia began her own investigation. She spent hours poring over online forums and archived news articles, searching for anything that might shed light on Evelyn's death. What she found only deepened her unease. Evelyn had been a well-known figure in their community, admired for her charitable work and her vibrant personality. Friends and neighbors described her as kind and outgoing, making it all the more shocking when her life was cut short. The police had focused heavily on Marcus during the initial investigation, citing his controlling behavior and their tumultuous marriage as potential motives. However, a lack of concrete evidence had prevented any charges from being filed. Amelia couldn't ignore the parallels between Evelyn's story and her own life. While Marcus had never shown any signs of violence toward her, she began to notice patterns in his behavior, subtle attempts to control certain aspects of her life, from her friendships to how she spent her free time. The memories of those moments, combined with what she now knew about Evelyn, created an unbearable sense of dread. As the pieces began to fall into place, Amelia knew she couldn't simply let this go. She had married a man who had been the prime suspect in his wife's murder, and he had never told her the truth. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that the life she had built with Marcus was built on a foundation of secrets. What terrified her most was the possibility that those secrets might not stay buried forever. Amelia's discovery of the newspaper clipping and the details surrounding Evelyn's death left her in a state of constant fear and paranoia. She tried to act as though nothing had changed, but her mind was consumed by what she had learned. Every interaction with Marcus became a test of her composure. She studied his words and actions, looking for signs of the man she had read about in those haunting articles. Was there a glimpse of the controlling, dangerous person described by Evelyn's friends? Was the Marcus she knew capable of such horrific violence? The questions gnawed at her, making it nearly impossible to sleep or think clearly. She decided to dig deeper, but knew she had to be cautious. Marcus was perceptive, and if he suspected she was investigating him, she feared what he might do. Late at night, after Marcus had gone to bed, Amelia began combing through the drawers in his office. She moved quickly and quietly, careful not to disturb anything that might give away her intrusion. At first she found nothing more than business documents, old receipts, and miscellaneous papers, but in the back of a locked drawer she discovered something that made her blood run cold. Inside was a journal, its black leather cover worn and unassuming. Her hands shook as she opened it, flipping through pages filled with Marcus's handwriting. The entries started innocently enough, notes about work, thoughts about life, but as she continued reading, the tone of the journal shifted. The words became darker, more obsessive. Marcus wrote about his frustrations with Evelyn, detailing their arguments and his growing resentment toward her independence. Amelia's heart sank as she read his words, describing how he felt trapped in their marriage, how he couldn't stand the idea of losing her to someone else. Then came the entry that confirmed Amelia's worst fears. Marcus had written in chilling detail about the night Evelyn died. He described how he planned every step, ensuring there would be no evidence to tie him to the crime. He had made it look like a burglary, staging the scene to mislead the police. He even wrote about his relief when the investigation stalled, knowing he had gotten away with it. As Amelia read the final lines of the entry, her stomach churned. The man she had fallen in love with, the man she had trusted with her life, had coldly and deliberately killed his first wife. Amelia quickly closed the journal and returned it to its hiding place, her mind racing. She knew she had to get out, but the thought of confronting Marcus or alerting the authorities immediately terrified her. She needed a plan, and she needed to act fast. Over the next few days, she began preparing to leave. She packed a small bag with essentials, carefully hiding it in the trunk of her car. She took photos of the journal's incriminating pages on her phone, determined to have evidence in case something went wrong. But Marcus wasn't oblivious. Amelia's behavior, no matter how much she tried to conceal her fear, had changed. She was quieter, more reserved, avoiding eye contact and flinching at his slightest movements. Marcus began watching her more closely, his once affectionate demeanor shifting into something colder and more calculating. He seemed to sense that she was slipping away from him, and his presence became suffocating. Amelia's unease grew with each passing moment. She realized that Marcus wasn't just the man who had killed Evelyn, he was still that man. The danger wasn't something from his past, it was alive and present. Every moment she stayed in the house, she felt like she was living on borrowed time, a single misstep away from meeting the same fate as Evelyn. Amelia's decision to escape had been made, but carrying it out was far more challenging than she could have anticipated. She lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, knowing that Marcus had grown suspicious of her behavior. Every glance he gave her felt loaded with questions, and every word she spoke felt like it might betray her fear. She could feel his eyes on her even when her back was turned. And the weight of his presence was suffocating. Each moment in the house became a calculated move, a careful balance between maintaining her composure and preparing for the dangerous leap to freedom. She had hidden the photos of the journal's incriminating pages on a backup drive she slipped into the lining of her purse. Her bag, already packed with essentials, remained in the trunk of her car. She began memorizing routes to the nearest police station and identifying the quickest exits from the house in case she needed to leave in a hurry. She even made sure to leave small clues about her routine unchanged, loading the dishwasher the same way, going for her usual jogs around the neighborhood to avoid alerting Marcus to her plans. Every detail mattered because she knew that one wrong move could cost her life. The tension in the house grew unbearable as Marcus became more controlling. He began questioning her about her day with an intensity that made her heart pound. If she hesitated for even a moment in her answers, his gaze would linger, sharp and probing. Amelia felt as though she was being hunted, her every action dissected by a man who seemed to be waiting for her to slip. He stopped letting her leave the house alone, insisting on accompanying her on errands and ensuring they were always together. This only confirmed what she already feared. Marcus knew she was planning to leave, and he wasn't going to let it happen. The night Amelia decided to make her escape was one of the longest of her life. She waited until Marcus had gone to bed, listening intently for the sound of his steady breathing to ensure he was asleep. The house was eerily silent, and every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet felt deafening as she tiptoed toward the front door. Her car keys were clutched tightly in her hand. her pulse racing as she unlocked the door and stepped out into the cool night air. But as she reached her car, a chill ran down her spine. She turned and saw Marcus standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light from the house. He didn't say a word, but the expression on his face told her everything she needed to know. He had been waiting for her to try this. Before she could react, he closed the distance between them, grabbing her wrist and dragging her back inside. Her cries for help were swallowed by the stillness of the night, and the neighbors, accustomed to the quiet suburb, heard nothing out of the ordinary. Inside the house, Marcus's calm facade cracked entirely. His anger was terrifying, a cold fury that made her realize just how dangerous he truly was. He accused her of betraying him, of prying into things she had no business knowing. Amelia fought back, desperate to escape, but Marcus's strength overpowered her. The struggle was brief, but brutal, and in the end Amelia's body lay lifeless on the floor of the home she had once thought was her sanctuary. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Marcus had already begun staging the scene to make it look like a tragic accident. But this time he made mistakes. Small traces of evidence, blood on his shirt, inconsistencies in his story would later become the threads that unraveled his carefully constructed web of lies. Amelia's final hours were marked by fear and courage, her determination to escape ultimately revealing the truth about the man she had once loved. The discovery of Amelia's lifeless body shattered the calm veneer of the quiet suburban neighborhood. It was Marcus who called the authorities, his voice steady but tinged with a rehearsed sorrow. He claimed that Amelia had fallen down the stairs in the middle of the night, that he had been too late to save her. The story seemed plausible at first glance. There were no immediate signs of foul play, and Marcus played the grieving husband convincingly. To neighbors and acquaintances, it was a tragic accident, nothing more. However, the detectives assigned to the case weren't so easily convinced. Something about Marcus's demeanor seemed too polished, too controlled. His sorrow felt more like a performance than genuine grief. The medical examiner's report raised further questions. While Amelia's injuries were consistent with a fall, there were subtle inconsistencies, bruising around her wrists, the angle of impact, and the absence of defensive wounds. These details suggested that her death might not have been as accidental as Marcus claimed. The investigation began quietly, with detectives piecing together Amelia's final days. Interviews with friends and family painted a starkly different picture of her marriage than the one Marcus had presented. Several close friends revealed that Amelia had recently confided in them about her growing fears of Marcus. She had described feeling trapped, watched, and controlled. One friend even mentioned that Amelia had been planning to leave him, though she hadn't shared the full extent of her concerns. The turning point came when investigators searched the house and found the journal Marcus had hidden. Despite his attempts to cover his tracks, he had underestimated the thoroughness of the detectives. The journal's contents were damning, a detailed confession of Evelyn's murder, written in Marcus's own hand. Though he had tried to stage Amelia's death as an accident, the journal linked him to both crimes. It was the smoking gun the investigators needed. Further digging uncovered Amelia's photos of the journal pages on her backup drive. The time-stamped images corroborated her discovery of Marcus's dark past. This evidence, combined with the inconsistencies in his story and the physical evidence from the scene, painted a clear picture of what had truly happened. Marcus had killed Amelia to keep his secret buried, just as he had done with Evelyn years earlier. When the police confronted Marcus with the evidence, his mask of composure cracked. He denied everything at first, insisting that the journal was nothing more than a piece of fiction he had written years ago. But as the evidence mounted, his denials grew weaker. Eventually, he broke under the pressure, confessing not only to Amelia's murder but also to Evelyn's. His motive was chillingly simple control. Marcus couldn't bear the thought of losing the women in his life, and when they threatened to leave or expose him, he eliminated them. The trial that followed was swift and damning. Marcus was convicted on multiple charges, including first-degree murder for both Evelyn and Amelia. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate that ensured he would never harm another person again. For the families of his victims, the verdict provided a measure of justice, but it couldn't erase the pain of their loss. Amelia's story became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of how easily darkness can hide behind a facade of charm and normalcy. Her bravery in uncovering the truth, though it cost her life, ensured that Marcus's crimes would no longer remain hidden. In the end, it was her determination that brought him to justice, leaving behind a legacy of strength and courage that would not be forgotten.